What's up, Wizards? It's Dev and Igby. We're from Mtg. We like it of magic, and it is Sunday night. You got stuff to do tomorrow, I know that, but let's not worry about that right now. Instead, let's end your weekend with a bang by looking at some Wilds of Eldraine spoilers. There's like 20 of these to look at today, both cards that were previewed over the weekend, and a couple of cards I'm going to pick up that I haven't talked about just yet this spoiler season. So grab yourself something cold, pop it open, take a seat, and let's look at some new cards. Now, we do have 3 commons to cover today before we start getting to stuff that I think might actually be really playable, but, you know, these are still new cards that deserve a little moment in the spotlight. Why not talk about Charmed Clothier, Grand Ball Guest, and Voracious Vermin? Old CC Babcock over here. That's right. We're going to start the video with a nanny reference and see if anybody gets that one. But yeah, Charmed Clothier over here is 5 mana, 4 and a white for a 3/3 fairy advisor with flying. When it ETBs, create a royal roll token attached to another target creature you control. Card is kind of booty. 5 mana, 3/3 flyer is not good in most formats, even limited most of the time. So I just don't really care that much. By the time you have 5 mana, a royal roll token's not going to matter that much. They'll just pay the award. So I'm not a big fan. It also has to target another creature, just like they made it as bad as possible. But I guess it creates a roll token, so stuff you can do with that. I don't know. It's just kind of a bad card. Let's not give it too many apologies. Let's move on to Grand Ball Guest. Just 1 and a red for a 2/2 human peasant with celebration. Grand Ball Guest gets +1/+1 and has trample as long as 2 or more non-land permanents entered the battlefield under your control this turn. So is it a better Armory Mice or a worse Armory Mice? Interesting. They're very similar cards in a lot of ways. I think this is probably better for most aggro decks, but that said, it can't trade as on blocks as easily. So I guess take your pick. Voracious Vermin is my favorite of these, though, pretty easily. This is 3 mana, 2 and a black for 2/1 rat. I like how that almost rhymes, and when it ETBs, you get one of them 1/1 black rat creature tokens that can't block. And whenever another creature you control dies, you put a +1/+1 counter on VV. That's okay. I mean, it's like an unruly mob. I think we also got another creature in this set that's like an unruly mob, actually. But this one, you know, it costs 1 more mana than it really should. But at the same time, at least it creates some fodder when it comes into play. I don't hate this in limited, but that's pretty much it. I mean, it's a nice little bread and butter common for these like rat decks that you're trying to put together. So look out for it there, but it doesn't really do anything else beyond that. But there was a common over the weekend that I thought was really worth looking at and almost playable, perhaps. This is Harried Spear Guard, just a single red mana for a 1/1 human soldier with haste. And when it dies, you get one of them rats that can't block. It's one of these, but this actually looks okay. It's like a Crawling Chorus or any number of 1-drops that we've seen over the last like 20 years in Magic that leave behind 1/1s when they die. But Crawling Chorus is not only the most recent, but probably the best comparison here, right? You're kind of trading the toxic on that token that can't block for haste on the original guy, which I think is probably better most of the time. I mean, yeah, obviously in the toxic deck, you want the toxic guy that leaves behind a toxic guy, but you're trading 2 keyword abilities, I guess, for 1 in this case. But I still think haste on the original dude is probably better, like 98% of the time. It's outside of the toxic deck. This is a much better creature to have. And we've seen these kind of Doom Traveler dudes be really good in the past a bunch of times. So maybe if there's some sort of red-black aristocrats deck, this is the 1-drop that they want to spec into. But let's get to some uncommons from today. We got Belligerent of the Ball, love it, and Twisted Sewer Witch, which I actually do love the text box on quite a bit, actually. But let's look at Belligerent first. Just a great name for a card. 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 3/3 Ogre Warrior with celebration at the beginning of combat on your turn. If 2 or more non-land permanents enter the battlefield under your control this turn, target creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains menace till end of turn. Okay, so it's not a Reckless Stormseeker, but we're getting there. In limited, this is probably a stocky little body. Not bad. 3 mana, 3/3, and then some of the time, the value it gives you will be pretty nice. Even if all it's really doing is making your 3 mana investment a 4/3 menace, pretty good stat line. So not terrible there, but not great anywhere else. Now, Twisted Sewer Witch is at least a cool card. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 black for a 3/4 human warlock. When it ETBs, you get a 1/1 black rat creature token with this creature can't block, and then for each rat you control, create a wicked roll token attached to that rat. So if you look at this as sideways as possible, you have to make sure you pop your neck as you look to the left at this card, and it's almost, hear me out, a Blood Artist. Look, I know I like aristocrats. If you're new to the channel, well, hey, that's the first thing you should know about me is I like sacrificing my creatures. I like Blood Artists, right? So I compare a lot of cards to that card, and it's really not. It's not that card. But I guess it's almost like a Sir Conrad. Look, basically what I'm saying is, if you have a lot of these rat tokens, or just rats in general, then suddenly, when this comes into play, it's doing a gray Merchant of Asphodel. It's not as good as any of the cards that I'm mentioning here. Which means it's probably not very good. It's 5 mana. That's an awful lot to cast. So I'm trying to be a little realistic about this card, but I also kind of can't help liking it. This seems like kind of a kill spell in some ways for the limited Rats deck, but I'm going to try to build it in Standard and stream it and kind of see how that works. This seems like, even at 5 mana, a nice little top-end piece, because you just send all your rats in. If they get in, your opponent dies. If they get blocked and die, then your opponent dies, because they just get hit for so much when these roll tokens fall off. So I can't help but like the card, basically. I like it a lot. Let's move on to Galvanic Giant and Two-Headed Hunter, both a couple of giants that actually look okay, man. Galvanic Giant is 4 mana, 3 and a blue for a 3/3 giant wizard. Whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, tap target creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. Okay. And then the adventure half here is Storm Reading, 5 and 2 blue for an instant. Draw 4 cards, discard 2 cards. All right, we're talking a little bit, but we're not talking that much. I think 7 mana is an awful lot. Look at all the other stuff. Does this compare to a Tally, right? But I guess you could make the argument a Tally's not instant speed either. So draw 4 at instant speed, like maybe a deck out there wants a copy of this, but I highly doubt it. This looks somewhat interesting and limited, so long as you have a way to ramp into the adventure half. It is worth noting that once you play 1 copy of the card, the creature half of it, then suddenly it synergizes with the adventure half. You tap something down, you put a stun counter on it. Obviously, this goes kind of well in the Hilda deck in limited, so you have some fun there, but I'm pretty sure this doesn't break into Standard. All that said, it's an interesting card, though. Two-Headed Hunter, I think, has slightly more of a chance in the format of Ill Repute. This is 5 mana, 4 and a red, Standard, for a 5/4 giant with Menace. That's all the creature half does, but the adventure half is an instant called Twice the Rage. Just 1 and a red to have a creature gain double strike till end of turn. That's kind of the going rate, We've seen a few cards in, I was going to say the recent past, but you can actually go back a bunch of years and find these like 2 mana instant speed, guy gains double strike kind of spells. And usually, especially lately, there's some kind of gravy on them, right? But these are sometimes playable in the right deck. So I kind of like this a little bit. There's a couple things in Standard we already have, like Twinferno, I believe, that'll give creatures double strike at exactly this rate. So I'm not sure that it's quite there, but I've talked about the 5/4 stat line a couple of times already, at least once that I can remember this spoiler season, right? 5 mana, like almost vanilla, it's just Menace. A 5/4 for 5 doesn't look super impressive until you remember that it blocks, Tolarian Terror in trades. It blocks Sheldred in trades. It blocks a bunch of like 5 power and toughness creatures in Standard and at least trades. If not, rolls right over them. So sometimes it's just going to be nice to have this 5/4 body laying around and have access to if the game goes too long. But in the meantime, just 2 mana for double strike at instant speed, like that's a kind of the going rate. Who cares? So that's good. That seems like a pretty solid little card to me. I should also quickly point out while we're in the uncommons that they're reprinting Glass Casket. They're doing that. I guess I don't know how good it's going to be in a format with ossification, but in like multicolored decks where you don't have as many basics, like maybe there's a shot, but I'm not too sure how good Glass Casket is in this day and age. But hey, in an artifact deck, maybe you care about artifacts. This is an artifact. It's always been a decent card, and I don't really see that changing. But let's move along and check in at the Edgewall here. Edgewall Inn is a land that ETB's tapped, and when it does so, you choose a color. You can tap it for a mana of the color you chose, but you can also pay 3 and tap it and sack it to return target card that has an adventure from your graveyard to your hand. Cool card. That's all I really have to say, but I think it's kind of obviously a somewhat strong-ish land. It's a real 7, but I don't know how far beyond a 7 it really goes. Some decks might play this regardless of needing an adventure in their deck, right? But I really don't think it comes to that a lot of the time. Maybe in Standard Brawl, right? This is just whatever color that you want. But again, Standard Brawl is a pretty narrow application. But I've been having fun in Standard Brawl lately, so whatever. Figure I'd point it out. But I think that we have a good enough mana base in Standard that a lot of 2 and 3 color decks really won't need to resort to this. But, if they got a strong adventure floating around, maybe you play a 1 of. So it's a pretty decent little card. Now, one more in common for the day before we move on to the rares, and it's a pretty good one. This is Storm Elk here. 4 mana, 3 and a green for a 3/4 elemental elk with trample. Whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, put a +1/+1 counter on Storm Elk. But it also has Peer Through Clouds. This is an instant adventure. Draw 2, discard 2. Yet another creature where the adventure half is just really very good looking, right? I mean, it's not quite Faithless Looting. It's double the cost of Faithless Looting, but I think that's still probably a good deal in Standard. We just lost Fable of the Mirror Breaker in Standard, and this card doesn't even begin to replace it, but it might be nice for a Sultai or Bant sort of Reanimator deck. I know I'm always bringing them up, but it's the obvious application here. Turn 2, add instant speed, draw 2, discard 2 is a fairly powerful line of text at that rate, and of course, at that speed, which I think is most important here. Instant speed, very cool to have on this card. If it was anything but, I really wouldn't be talking about it this much. But instant speed, 2 mana, draw 2, discard 2. You could do a whole lot worse than that. We already have like Faithless Looting in the format. It doesn't see a whole lot of play. So some of the comparisons, like Tainted Indulgence, for instance, don't hold up super well. And those cards look very strong on release too. So I'm not sure how good this actually is in reality. But when you do staple this to a pretty stout body that has the ability to get bigger as the game goes on, like, again, we begin to have a conversation. So Simic is not important in Standard right now. And I don't think this card really makes it or any, again, blue-green X variant more popular just by itself. But it might be a key role player if one of those decks comes together in the future. But as promised, let's get to the rares. Here's A Tale for the Ages to start us off. This is 2 mana, 1 and a white for an enchantment. Enchanted creatures you control get +2/+2. Plus when you play it, you get enchantment triggers and stuff like that. Things are looking kind of okay with this. It's only a couple of mana. But again, I have to wonder if the decks that actually want this in Standard care enough to play this. I mean, this time it's 2 mana rather than the one that was 4 mana, Archon of whatever it's called, the other day that I had this sort of extended conversation about green-white enchantments with you about. I think this is probably better in a deck like that, but I still think that you're kind of going to get blown out some of the time in terms of combat math when you think you've got the damage and all your opponent has to do is like to remove the enchantment off of a creature or remove this and you get blown out. But that's true of most Anthem effects. And you don't hear me belly aching about everything else. So maybe I'm just being a little too cautious about this card. But even if you only have like 2 guys with auras on them, then suddenly this 2 mana adds +4/+4 to the board. Anything more than that, 3-4 enchanted guys, then suddenly you can really just run the opponent over. So I might be kind of looking into it too much. It is just a strong card on the surface, and obviously this is going to be a commander playable forever, so I should at least bring that up. It's going to be very good in that format, and pretty much every deck that plays enchantments, so I should probably be more excited about it because I'm trying to build Sithis right now. It's probably just slots directly into just have this and Sithis and you feel good about yourself. So probably going to be paying a pretty penny for this when the time does come. It's going to be an important card there, but in competitive like 60 card environments, I'm not too sold just yet. But let's quickly look at 4 cards that I haven't gotten to yet this spoiler season, and a few of you have reminded me of that. Don't worry. I was planning on getting to them, but I'm trying to keep videos like under 30 minutes or an hour, right? Some of the time. So I knew I was going to get around to stuff like Blossoming Tortoise eventually. Here we are. I guess we'll also look at Farsight Ritual while we're here. Now, Tortoise is 4 mana, 2 and 2 green for a 3/3 turtle, and whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, mill 3 cards, return a land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Activated abilities of lands you control cost 1 less to activate, and land creatures you control get +1/+1. So in Commander, this is making my Nykthos cost a little bit less, plus all my creature lands cost less to activate and stuff. All that's feeling really, really nice. Plus some other like sort of more narrow small scale combos you can pull off with different lands that have activated abilities. High Market is free to activate. Now let's go. So is that, no, it is High Market. I was going to say, is that Black Market? It is High Market that I'm thinking of, the one from Mercadian Masks. But anyway, there's some cool stuff this does like that. Obviously it buffs all your man lands or whatever. So, you're feeling good about that. They've been working out, benching and all that. So, not bad. But the best line of text on this card is the ramp line of text. And it is just kind of a hill giant that's harder to cast. 4 mana 3/3, right? That's not great, so it better do something cool, and it better do it as soon as it ETBs. Good news is, it does, right? 4 mana for a dude that ramps you 1 isn't Topiary Stomper or anything, but, at least it has some other value beyond that, and it can ramp you again if it attacks. You're probably sending it to its death if it does, but sometimes it's going to be worth it to maybe trade in combat or do something like that and also get another land. So just a cool card. Obviously, in decks that are sort of milling themselves with a couple of cards already, like this could work out because it doesn't actually have to mill the lands right then and there. There could just already be lands in your yard. Maybe you channeled a Boseiju or something on an earlier turn. Play this, get the Boseiju on the battlefield. All that feels pretty good. There's applications for this card in Standard, but are there stronger 4-drops? Is this the thing that makes green playable? Probably not by itself, but if there's multiple cards that sort of form the core of a green X deck, I'm kind of looking at a green mid-range deck coming together as we see some of these cards. I could see this being, again, a key role player, but we'll have to see. I do want to look at Farsight Ritual too, another 4-mana thing, 2 and 2 blue for an instant this time with Bargain. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. If the spell was Bargain, look at the top 8 cards of your library instead. Put 2 of them into your hand, the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So this is fine. This is fine unbargained. This is just kind of the typical, draw 2 plus gravy at 4 mana instant speed. We see these in every other set. Sometimes it feels like literally every set we see these. But this one slightly can be at least slightly better. So I don't think it's going to be too hard to find something to bargain for this. And at that point, you're getting better than a flashbacked Memory Deluge, right, at 4 mana. Problem is you can't cast it twice like you can Memory Deluge, so maybe we have to wait for some kind of rotation to happen, which will be a while before this card sees play, because I think Memory Deluge is probably better in most lists, because, you don't have to pay anything off the table to cast Memory Deluge, and you can cast it twice. Again, I just think it's a stronger card, but I still think this is at least worth looking at. It's a nice piece of cardboard, right? I mean, it's decent if you don't bargain it. You do bargain it, it's broken. So let's at least look at this card. But we got 2 more cards to look at that I've missed, and they are strong cards. Let's take a look at Elvish Archivist, please, and Realm Scorcher Hellkite here. Now, Archivist, man, this one I'm in love with. 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 0/1 Elf Artificer. Whenever 1 or more artifacts enter the battlefield under your control, put 2 +1/+1 counters on Archivist. This ability triggers only once each turn. Whenever 1 or more enchantments enter the battlefield under your control, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. So, I'm not even that bummed out about the only once each turn clause on both abilities here. This dude is sick. Just 2 mana to get this onto the table. And yeah, he's a 0/1 or whatever, but he'll become like a 2/3 on the next turn. The next turn will be a 4/5. If he goes another turn, what is he, a 6/7? Geez, he gets really big fairly fast. So it just won't take more than, turn 5. It's already gotten huge if you're playing stuff right. In the meantime, if you are just casting an enchantment every turn and you're not making this thing bigger, and who's to say you can't do both? You totally can, but if you don't really want to spec into both, you want to spend all your points on one thing, then at least it's an enchantress. It's a 2 mana enchantress. We don't see a whole lot of those. The last one, I'm sure we've seen them, but, Argothian Enchantress, we're talking sort of that level of a Magic card here. So anytime I see a 2 mana draw a card when you play an enchantment, that also kind of gets me very happy. So this works in multiple decks, and I'm sure there's a deck that can take advantage of both modes at the same time. So just a sweet card. There's a whole lot of decks in Commander that can probably take a lot of advantage of this. Again, whether they're playing both strats or one or the other, they might want this card. So again, the once a turn thing just doesn't bum me out. I think that it's still perfectly kind of well balanced. It's really cheap to get on the table. One of the cards I am most excited about in this entire set. But then there's also, I guess, Realm Scorcher Hellkite over here. I really should have probably flipped the order of these 2 cards. I'm not as excited about this, but it is a cool card. This is 6 mana, 4 and 2 red for a 4/6 dragon with Bargain. It also has flying and haste. When Realm Scorcher Hellkite enters the battlefield, if it was bargained, add 4 mana in any combination of colors. And just in case you needed a way to spend it, you can pay 1 and a red to have Hellkite deal 1 damage to any target. So if you have nothing else to spend this mana on, you just get to shock something, or pick off 2 1 toughness things. That would be pretty hot if you got to do that. But if nothing else, you can at least fling the damage at your opponent's face. That's 6 coming at them right then and there, because this has haste. That's nice. But if you have something to spend the mana on, it becomes much better. Imagine turns where you spend treasure on this to ramp into it or something. You cast this immediately at Sushi. That also seems very sexy. So I think it's a pretty sweet card here. 6 mana is kind of a lot to get to, and I think if there's a death knell for this card, it's probably that. Not sure how standard playable it is just because of its mana cost, but that said, you can untap with it and play, and theoretically, if you had the mana to cast it, now of course you may have used treasure, but if you have the mana to cast it, you can ping at least twice, if not 3 times, as soon as you untap with this in play. So you're just bolting stuff like every turn, and as your mana gets more and more, you can deal like 4 damage to something, or just, eventually clock your opponent that way. If you can untap with this in play, really, if you cast this, hit your opponent with it, attack wise, for 4 damage. Untap with it and play, hit him for another 4, and have all of your mana untapped, then suddenly you can hit for 11 just over the space of a couple of turns because you're able to untap with this in play. So I actually think there might be something to this, but again, 6 mana is bringing me down a lot, but it's not like we don't already play 6 mana cards in standard. We play quite a few of them actually. Well, let's look at some stuff from the weekend again. Here's Tangled Colony here. 1 and a black for a 3/2 rat that can't block. And when it dies, create X/1/1 black rat creature tokens with this creature can't block, where X is the amount of damage dealt to it this turn. Now, I do see folks getting excited about this one, and I can understand why, like in the Rats deck in Standard, we need some strong 2-drops. We keep seeing all these cool 3-drops. We already had some cool 3-drops to the Rat deck, like Caramonics, but we just don't have a whole lot of really strong-looking 2s yet, and an aggro deck needs to kind of have those. Very important. So this, pretty exciting for the Rats deck, but really nothing else in specific, like in mono black aggro, you've got Tenacious Underdog, it's probably a better card. You've got Razor Last Transmogrant, it's probably a better card, so I'm just not too sure. I think Blade of the Oni is like, at least in some cases, better. I really like Blade of the Oni, just always standing for that card if I can. In any case, I'm just not sure how good this is going to actually be in Standard outside of the Rats deck, and I don't think the Rats deck's going to be great in Standard, but, put that on my tombstone. There is also some hope for it, I guess, in like an Aristocrats type shell. I keep bringing it up, but anytime you see one big guy that pops and creates a bunch of small guys, that looks really good in Aristocrats, even in like Commander. Like if you can somehow engineer a way to bolt this or hit it with, Voltage Surge? I could actually see that working or something. And you hit it for 4 damage, and then suddenly it pops for 4 guys. You get a dice trigger off of that, and then you can sack the guys and get dice triggers off of them and get mana off of Ashnod's Altar. You could be having a good time with this, is all I'm saying, because, if you can make it work, then suddenly getting a bunch of dudes off it might be really nice. But outside of, again, those fairly, admittedly narrow applications, I'm not actually sure this card is as good as it looks. Let's move on to, barring any reloads on the spoiler sites, the final card of the day. It's Restless Bivouac. This has gotten a lot of talk, and I can see why. It's a land that ETB's tapped, and it makes Boros colors, red or white. But you can pay 1 a red and a white to have it become a 2/2 red and white Ox creature token till end of turn that's still a land. Whenever it attacks, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Okay, so I am not as into this as a lot of other folks reviewing the card. I know that it's like a Raging Ravine or something like that. It's similar to a modern card that was important in the long ago and all that, but maybe there's a reason that card hasn't been that important in a while. But I want to be really impressed by this. If it gets in, if it gets in, then suddenly, again, it's kind of like Blossoming Tortoise, right? If it's able to attack freely and then attack again, then I think you're doing really, really well in that game of magical cards. But that's kind of a lot to ask. I mean, it's cost a whole 3, which is less than some of the creature lands I do like. But there's a reason for that. It's a long, drawn-out reason, but I love those, so we'll get to it in a second. But this goes in an aggro deck, right? It goes in a very creature-heavy deck that can distribute +1/+1 counters, and of course, it can put that counter on itself if there are no other creatures, right? I'm fully aware of that. So like a Jeskai control deck, possibly, but even then, 3 mana on your turn can be kind of a lot. I'm not too convinced that a 2/2 that becomes a 3/3 that becomes a 4/4 is actually that good in a format that already has like Mishra's Foundry, you know what I mean? So maybe I'm just being dumb on this one, but I'm just not too sure about it. One thing that I will say in its favor is that if it attacks and doesn't put the counter on itself and then just dies that combat step, at least you got value out of it, right? It didn't just leave the table doing nothing. You got something out of your, basically 4 mana investment because it has to tap 2. And you lost a land. Is it worth putting a +1/+1 counter on a thing to lose a land? Maybe, depending on what the game state is. Yes. So it could be the answer to that question, but I don't know. This is one of those things that if it attacks freely, it's great. And it looks pretty good in the modified decks. I will say this is in the right color combination. Because in like, the Thundering Raiju decks and stuff like that, it looks pretty good there. But does it? I guess if you get swept, you definitely want something like this. You're going to play it in the red-white modified deck. But how important is red-white modified deck? I'm not sure that a tapped land is going to make it much more important. Tapped lands aren't usually super great in aggro decks, but I'm not, again, maybe I could be misjudging things. There are reasons why I like, the Golgari one, for instance. The Golgari land costs 4 mana to activate, which is kind of a lot, but you get a 4/4. That's a big chunk. You don't have to work towards it. You just get a 4/4 and you get a food token and you get to play around in a graveyard, exile thing from a graveyard. That's a ton of value for a mid-range kind of grindy, slow roll, almost control deck that controls the board state and zap stuff here and there and wants to play that kind of slower game. I don't think you mind paying 4 mana for your creature land so long as it's a pretty big guy that also stabilizes your life total at the same time. And that's what the green-black one does in those kind of grindy decks. This wants to go again in decks like red-white modified, and I will say again, there's a window where you play this. You're able to swing with it after the sweeper, keep pressure on your opponent. Very important in that role. So I'm not saying it doesn't see play in standard. It very likely does, and it's a good land. But I just think there are other creature lands I like more, and that's, whatevs. But maybe I'm not seeing it. It does cost less to activate. That's got to mean something. Would you look at that? We did get a new card on MTG Previews. It's Solitary Sanctuary. I was sure this was going to be the art for a creature land, but it's not. It's 3 mana, 2 and a white for an enchantment. When it ETBs, tap target creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. Neat. Whenever you tap an untapped creature an opponent controls, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Okay, all right, so some ETB value here. If you can flicker it, you get to stun something else. It's stun tokens in mono white. I don't know that we've actually ever seen that before. Hope maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. And then you also get sort of extra ETB value. This is basically 3 mana at sorcery speed, put a stun counter on something and a +1/+1 counter on something else that you control, which is not the absolute best rate in the world, especially at sorcery speed, but you're also playing an enchantment. You can sacrifice this for bargain later in limited. That seems good. And obviously in the Hilda deck, you're getting repeated value off of this. So seems pretty good as a signpost for that deck. But again, I don't think this sees much play out of limited, but pretty important looking card, at least, for the Hilda deck in draft. But that is it for the weekend block party. It's over. We all got to go home. I'm sorry about that. Return to work on Monday morning, school, whatever you got going on. But we will be back as soon as you get off, as soon as you get, whatever you're doing, you get off the bus, you punch the clock, whatever you're into, whatever your life is like. We will be here for you tomorrow afternoon, or more likely night, with some more spoilers for Wilds of Eldraine. It's not quite over yet. We've seen a little over half the set at this point, so we got a lot more to cover. Be here. If you haven't done it yet, subscribe to the channel for more spoiler content, because we're going to be looking at every card in the set from now on. And it won't be long before we look at every card in the set in one sitting on Twitch and do our speedrun review. So make sure you follow over here on Twitch if you're into that idea. I put myself through a lot for you, so follow on Twitch. It's free to do so. And of course, you can check us out on Patreon if you want to support the content for just $1 a month, and you can pick what decks we do at the beginning of Wilds of Eldraine Standard and other content beyond that as well. So just $1 a month. Do I deserve it? I think so. I really work very hard. I do. So if you feel like it, $1 a month is really all I ask. But that's all the self-promotion I'll give you. Just let me know how you felt about all of today's stuff. Go. Elvish Archivist, man. Oh, Elvish Archivist. Can't wait to play with that card. But let's see what we get off the couch. I almost cheated and kind of looked at the couch too much. So let's dig real deep. Make sure we didn't get a card that I don't get a card that I saw. There's English. All right. So what's this? Okay. Not bad. We got foil Obscura Charm. I see people in the comments like, so you get foils and you don't say they're foils. Okay, here's a foil Obscura Charm. Not a bad little thing to pull. It is white, blue, and black Esper colors. For an instant, you choose one. Target creature or return. Target creature. It doesn't say that anywhere. Return target multicolored permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Or you can counter target instant or sorcery spell. Or you can destroy, there it is, target creature or planeswalker with mana value 3 or less. That's a good card, right? A counter spell, a removal spell, and a sort of reanimation spell. Really like a raised dead kind of thing. All in one card. Add instant speed. Super versatile, awesome card. Sees no play. Sees absolutely zero play in standard, but it is a cool card, I promise you. But that is all we have got. We have reached the end of our journey of 1,000 steps. We are now back at the Hobbit's doorstep. So you guys just go inside, have yourself a little cake, feel good about yourselves, and I will see you again Monday night. Thanks for watching, everybody. Spread love and be kind.